Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the process of conditioning and answer the question, are we all just conditioned? Are we actually in control of what we do? So let's think about what we've done today. Talk you through a typical example of stuff that may feel pretty meaningless, but we'll explore it in a deeper context throughout this session. So imagine you're on a Monday morning, your alarm rings in the morning, 6 o'clock, you get out of bed. You smell some coffee and anticipation begins to grow for the day ahead. You go to your lessons at 8:50 in the morning. You get a notification on your phone. Your recent social media post had a like, and this makes you feel a bit happy, a bit excited. You didn't do your homework, and you have a feeling of fear. You know you're going to get attention, and this is frustrating and annoying. You go to your favourite chicken shop after school, and then you feel better about it. All of these things are examples of conditioned actions. We often don't think about these fully consciously. However, there is something much deeper going on. So this theory of conditioning lends itself to these two men here. We've got Skinner and Pavlov, who were the fathers of behaviorism, the idea in psychology that all human behaviors are conditioned responses and there is not much of a role within thoughts and mental processes. And this was the dominating field of psychology between 1920s and 1950s. There are two types of conditioning that we are going to discuss today. Classical conditioning, also known as associative learning, and operant conditioning, also known as consequence learning. Classical conditioning, from Ivan Pavlov, came as a result of his famous work with dogs. He took an unconditioned stimulus, which elicits a natural response, for example, food causing salivation within dogs, and paired it with a neutral stimulus, the bell. Now, the neutral stimulus would not cause any form of response on its own. However, over repeated pairing of the bell, the neutral stimulus, with the unconditioned stimulus, the dogs began to associate with it, and the bell would salivate upon the bell being rung. The bell became a conditioned stimulus, and the dogs salivate in response to it, even in the absence of food. And this is called a conditioned response. Timing is extremely important in conditioning, especially of the classical variety. The closer that the natural stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus are paired together, the stronger the conditioned response will be. This response can, however, be eventually lost in what we call extinction learning. Extinction is where a conditioned response can be lost if the conditioned stimulus, in this case the bell, is continually supplied in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus, the food. Eventually, dogs would stop responding to the bell in the absence of food. The association would progressively weaken. Extinction is not forgetting of old learning, but rather an active inhibition by the brain of this previous conditioning. Conditioning can be recovered after a long period of time of absence if the neutral and unconditioned stimuli were paired again. For example, the conditioned behavior could be relearned with the same stimuli. Furthermore, stimulus generalization, where individuals respond to similar stimuli to the conditioned stimulus, or discrimination between stimuli can also occur. So, for example, different noises, sounds, and prompts may lead to more individual behaviors depending on what they've been paired with. Now, there are a few issues with classical conditioning. It is extremely powerful and is seen in many facets of everyday life. However, sometimes people may take advantage of this to be manipulative, such as within the advertising industries of various products, which we'll have a look at now. On the left here, you've got a lady smoking cigarettes, and the idea behind this advert is to associate the lady's beauty with the cigarettes to make people think that smoking is fashionable and cool and lead to you being desirable. Obviously, that's not the case. However, on a subconscious level, following multiple pairings and exposures, people will begin to smoke as they did due to fashion status idea. The same goes for this middle advert here, with Guinness being deemed good for you and happiness being a choice associated with Pepsi in this case. The advertisers are using classical conditioning to tug on the subconscious mind of those individuals exposed to it so that they begin to choose that item without even thinking about it, or potentially the consequences associated with it in these cases. The last one that we have is actually a different type of conditioning called operant conditioning, which we'll discuss in a minute. Now, smartphones are extremely addictive, and partly this is due to the fact that they manipulate these conditioning principles. We all know how smartphones have become more and more addictive and part of our everyday lives over the years. And they play on aspects of both classical and operant conditioning to keep us on them and engaged for long periods of time. Studies found that fear and anxiety responses are reported and indeed heightened when individuals without their phone are exposed to cues related to their phones, such as pictures or people using their phones, which shows how addictive they have become. Now, classical conditioning has got numbers of clinical relevancies, including drug addiction. Many drug addicts experience cravings in environments or around people which they associate with the drugs, and this can trigger relapse even after long abstinence. When a taste is paired with a drug that alters the immune system, the taste alone can cause an immune response. And anxiety disorders often start out as specific phobias, but then due to the stimuli generalization effect that we discussed, those fears can generalize into other contexts, leading to generalized anxiety disorder. The other type of conditioning is operant conditioning, and this was devised by B.F. Skinner during the 1930s and published in his book, The Behavior of Organisms, 1938. It is different from classical conditioning, as rather than use association, it uses rewards and punishment to influence behavior. The Skinner box, which was a chamber for rats, was used by B.F. Skinner in 1948. He placed hungry rats within the chamber with a lever, and if they pressed the lever, then they would receive a pellet of food, which was their reward. And as a result, over time, the rats would begin to press the lever more, as it was positively reinforced. Now, there are three operants that can follow a behavior. So there may be a neutral operant, so responses from the environment that have no effect on a behavior frequency. Not everything's going to elicit a response. Reinforcers, which increase the chance of a behavior happening, such as our food in the previous example. And punishers, which are responses from the environment that reduce the likelihood of behavior. So a variation of the Skinner box would be to pair the lever with an electric shock. And that would, of course, remove the rat's ability or desire, to pull the lever over time. Now, positive reinforcement is extremely powerful. Reinforcement of behaviors through rewards often involves dopamine pathways in the brain. Now, there are a couple of types of reinforcers. There's primary reinforcers, which naturally reinforce and are not learned, such as food, water, and sex. And secondary reinforcers, which may be associated with obtaining those primary reinforcers, such as money and grades. It's also important to note that many recreational drugs are also acting as secondary reinforcers, although money and those drugs can be seen just as powerfully as the primary reinforcers. The PREMAT principle is the idea that we can condition desirable behaviors from an individual by pairing the desirable behavior that we want them to do with something that they want to do. So, for example, getting a child to eat their vegetables, which is obviously the desirable behavior, being paired with dessert. This will increase the desired behavior over time. Now, there are a few issues with operant conditioning, which are extremely important in life. Reward dependence being the main one. Those of us who depend on continuous external reward and praise, this can lead to dependence where the individual does the activity rather than for the innate motivation to do it. They do it because they become dependent on the reward. Punishment, which is the opposite of reinforcement, is designed to reduce frequency of behaviors. Punishment, however, can lead to fear and aggression over time and normalize aggression as a response to problems, as we see in many criminals who may have been abused or punished too severely as a child. In humans, punishment should be fair, immediate, and proportionate with behaviors outlined, and the punishment should also be explained to them. Reinforcement schedules are extremely important into getting behaviors of desire from an individual, and obviously this applies to training animals and various other aspects as well. Continuous reinforcement is actually the weakest form of reinforcement and is extinguished extremely quickly. We won't do what we are asked in the absence of this continued reward. Variable ratio reinforcement is, however, the fastest due to the novelty and the brain's innate seeking of novelty. We don't know when we're going to get the reward, so we keep doing the things that are potentially going to get us rewarded in the hope that we eventually do. And this is how gambling and loot boxes and various other things within society can work. So let's have a look at a few of these. So we've obviously got gambling, which we mentioned, the variable reinforcement. We don't know when we're going to win. We might think, oh, we've had a few losses, we're going to win soon. The gambler's fallacy. Merits and praise within class, detention as punishment, and of course the notifications that we mentioned earlier. Now I want you to go back to what we've done today and identify how classical and operant conditioning may have appeared in your life. And are you now aware of anything that you were not before? Is it possible that you now think differently about some of the behaviours that you previously subconsciously did? Thank you for watching.